It's been a cold, wet day in South London. Rain, the audio of rain is my least favourite weather-related audio. I'm the kind of guy that does need a light box. Rain on a Monday, that's the worst thing for me. That is a killer. It's been raining pretty much since the morning here. I've got bogged down in a rewrite, trying to go through loads of old drafts, trying to work out what can maybe be used on this new revised draft of the script, using the right arm to hold the phone steady. It's a concern given the amount of these videos that I've done. I'm wondering whether that might lead to some extra muscularity in this right arm, and the left arm's going to start looking skinny by comparison. Just something for me to be mindful of. So February was unusually warm. I think it was February here in London. Now we've got this cold August day. Well, I'm not going to talk about the weather. You're not watching this, the 5 or 6 of you who are watching this, you're not watching this to hear about the weather. I'm going to talk to you about an incident from Christmas 2007, or it might be late New Year, just hearing a police car coming by. It is South London. It's like the podcast days, isn't it, where my podcast would regularly be interrupted by police cars. It was the last holiday I took. I was coming back from Spain around December 2007. And my last holiday for 2 reasons. I don't like flying. I was flying an awful lot in the last decade. Largely for work reasons, but also, had a few holidays. I was making good money. But so I didn't like flying, so that was the main reason. But also I found that when I was on holiday, I wasn't switching off. I'm the kind of guy that just needs to write. I like to write. I love to write. And whether it's here or in another country, that's what I do. I'm just not a tourist. I don't have the tourist thing in me. Now, for about 20 years, well, at the time, just over a decade, I'd had this hero-related fantasy, and it stemmed from what at the time was apparently the coldest night in 20 years. It was December 1996. I'd got in the habit of going with a couple of old friends to, this was when I was still, my pre-teetotal days. We found a pub. One of the guys had a car. We found a pub in Hampton Court, or Hampton Wick, around there anyway. Lovely pub, and we used to go there at least once a week. And this was December 1996. It was supposed to be the coldest night of the year, and it was really cold. And when we parked up, we used to have to walk over this footbridge. And I remember, maybe I was just too young and it just went over my head at the time. I remember seeing, I think it was a woman in a phone box, public phone box. She'd come out and she was talking to a guy who had his legs over over the side of the bridge. The drop to the water, it didn't look that high to me. We continued walking. I was puzzled by this, and on the other side of the bridge we saw a bunch of police frogmen frantically working to inflate their little boat. And it was only later I realised that we had just walked past a suicide attempt. And I never found out how that panned out. But ever since that night, I had this fantasy of being the guy who would come to someone's aid. And in the original fantasy, it would be, there'd be someone had fallen into the Thames. It was always the Thames, usually around Vauxhall Bridge, probably my favourite bridge. And I would dive into the water, save them, pull them out, and wouldn't hang around for the emergency services or the press. I'd be the mystery hero. Witnesses would give interviews to the press. No one would know who I was, and I would just wander off. Actually, I think that this may also stem from the late 80s. I had a friend for a brief moment in my life. When you're young, you make friends very easily, and they often don't last long. And this was a northern guy whose brother. They both worked in security, and they were between them covering a 24-hour shift at a building that's still there on Vauxhall Bridge on the Grosvenor Road side, Pimlico, if you know the area. And I remember I was told, the story was, an overweight Japanese man had tried to kill himself jumping into the Thames, and the older brother, who I didn't know as well, had jumped into the Thames and saved him, and then was left deflated when he was told he had to be tested for various diseases that might have been prevalent in the Thames in that period, the late 80s. So I think that kind of probably laid the seed of the idea in my head. Then it was reinforced by this Kingston incident. During the recession, I had such a tough time that I tweaked the fantasy a little. In this fantasy, it was I was pulling someone out of the river successfully. This time, the fantasy moved westwards, the nicest part of the river in London, the Putney Embankment, and I would emerge from the water, this young person in my arms, my shirt soaked through, and unbeknown to me, this person I'd saved, their dad was a wealthy person. And this time I would hang around for the reward because I needed the reward. I needed to get through the recession in an easier fashion than I was doing. So I always had this kind of thing. It was a thing for me. And unexpectedly, out of the blue, I think that's the same thing, isn't it? Unexpectedly, out of the blue, I was travelling back December 2007. I was living in Putney at the time. I had my suitcase with me. Didn't get a cab from the airport, just jumped on a train. And then I was getting the train to Putney. It was a Saturday night, and I knew that when I booked that holiday, I wasn't happy about coming back on a Saturday night. I thought it's going to be really busy. Travelling with a suitcase, this is a stupid thing to do, and I was right. There were no seats available. I was standing in the aisle. There was a girl opposite me, and there was a guy who was muttering aloud and, obviously had some issues. People were keeping their head down. He was being very aggressive. Here's the thing that I haven't told you. I picked up an infection in Spain the last few days. My face was getting bigger. I think it was a glands issue. So by the time I boarded my flight, I was looking somewhat deformed. Here was an opportunity to step in, come to this girl's aid, because the man had turned on her. He was abusing her, shouting at her. No one was stepping in. Here was me, first of all, handicapped by a suitcase, which limited what I could do. Someone had their bike in an aisle as well. So there wasn't much space in case things really kicked off. And I had this huge face. I suppose if the incident had happened nowadays, everyone would have been filming. No one would have come to my aid now either. That hasn't changed, but we're in a culture now where everybody films incidents rather than acting. So this horrendous face, this horrendously large face of mine, for which I had to get antibiotics the following day, would have probably gone viral online. Mystery, have a go, swollen-faced hero comes to girl's aid on West London train. And I stepped in, held my ground with the guy, but I just felt so sorry for this girl. I prevented the situation from getting worse. I asked her if she was okay. What a horrible situation for her to be in. Being abused by a guy who was obviously mentally unwell and being rescued by a really ugly, large-faced guy. I mean, what an absolute nightmare. And for me, I was crestfallen, really. The incident, there was my opportunity to be a hero, and physically I just looked an absolute mess. I looked like I had some rare illness. People would have seen the suitcase. They might have thought he's probably travelling in from the tropics. He's obviously picked up something unusual. Maybe that's why people didn't step in to come to my aid. Maybe they thought I had something contagious. Who knows? So that was the Have a Go Hero fantasy. I hope you have had a decent day. I hope you're keeping warm on this cold August day. Please click the subscribe button if you're enjoying these videos, and I'm assuming I'll catch up with you tomorrow. Take care.